Most people believe that in order to build massively distributed systems, they need to use microservices. Typically in the form of some message broker, such as Pulsar or RabbitMQ or some similar type of technology that allows for event-driven architecture using constructs such as service-oriented architecture, etc., etc. Not only is that overly complex compared to what you can do, but it is also ridiculously inflexible. There are solutions to distributed systems that are literally 1,000,000 times better and more flexible than your average message broker solution. And in this video I'm going to demonstrate it. You see, Lambda is a virtual execution environment, implying the only thing you can do in Lambda is to execute the slots that are available for you within your context. Now, the available slots can actually be configured, or the number of available slots can be reduced, period. That's the only thing that Lambda supports. And it can be reduced using a concept that I refer to in Lambda as whitelists. And a whitelist is basically an execution of any arbitrary type of Lambda through a whitelist invocation, allowing me to create a whitelist of which slots are available within that particular execution context. And that allows me to create an HTTP endpoint that accepts code, for then to securely execute that code on my server, not knowing what it even does. And this is not some theoretical abstract concept. This is a concept I've been able to do using Lambda now for 5-6 years. Now, this way of thinking about microservices becomes the equivalent of the www protocol, HTML and HTTP, except where the World Wide Web protocol is for exchanging data. Lambda is for exchanging logos. Logos implies thought and logic, and it comes from the ancient Greeks. You see, in Lambda, there is one crucial difference between Lambda and all other programming languages, or most other programming languages, which is that in Lambda there is absolutely no difference between data and functionality. So this is often referred to as homo-iconicity, right? Because the structures you use to create Lambda are the same structures used during execution. So this allows me to dynamically modify the execution environment during runtime, and therefore become capable of whitelisting specific keywords that I want arbitrary clients to be legally allowed to execute. And this allows me to transmit code from one server to another server, have that other server securely executing that code and returning whatever result that code wants to have returned back to the client. So typically in a standard solution with HTTP web requests and stuff like that, or REST or APIs, etc., you have an environment where the server provides the code and the client provides the input or the arguments. Now, if you wish, you can imagine the whitelist invocation and the ability to transmit code from the client to the server as the exact opposite, where instead of having a situation where the server provides the code and the client provides the data, the server provides the data and the client provides the code. So this completely reverses the responsibility related to who is supposed to be providing the code. And this, in theory, allows you to build systems consisting of hundreds of millions of individual heterogeneous servers, where these servers are in theory never executing the same code even twice, because they're getting the code as input from the client, whom on a need to know basis has somehow created a piece of code that it wants to execute on the server. Now this has huge benefits, such as, for instance, the ability to, for all practical concerns, extend the server's functionality infinitely, literally. And this implies you no longer need to, as a server software developer, to anticipate the user's future needs. All you need to do is to figure out what hyperlambda slots you want users to be legally allowed to execute, and what roles and or individuals you want to be able to execute this code. For them to expose a dynamic endpoint that actually doesn't contain code, that simply takes codes as an input argument, for them to transform that code into a Lambda object, which it then executes, then resulting in that it returns the result of the execution back to the client. Now the end result of this, in theory, becomes that those 100 million servers, if you imagine something like this applied to the internet as a whole, for instance, then what you end up with is a heterogeneous single organism, where instead of thinking about each individual server as a separate entity, you can imagine each individual server as a single cell in a larger superorganism, where the server network as a whole is that superorganism. And the execution rights can also be restricted according to RBAC, role-based access control, or you can have tons of other different types of authentication protocols, assigning different users different execution rights, which again mimics the way humans socially interact. If you think about it, for instance, me, I'm very much okay with, showing my willy to my wife, but I'm not okay with showing it here on this YouTube video in front of you to the rest of the world. So that means my wife has extended rights related to me and my person, similarly to how you can create extended rights using, for instance, the JWT authentication mechanisms from Magic and Hyperlambda, and or as I previously did like 3-4 years ago, where you even have a solution where you can have people submit their public cryptography keys and associate individual execution rights according to what the cryptography key has been used to cryptographically sign the payload, which is being verified before execution occurs. And at that point you can even associate individual slots and functions for each individual user in the system, and have a completely fine-grained execution environment based exclusively upon homoiconicity and the ability to do meta programming. And while I've been talking here on this video, I've actually created such a system in the screen here somewhere, which I will give you a link to in the description of this YouTube video, allowing you to reproduce everything that I did in this video. However, fundamentally, you can say that the whole idea is a little bit Buddhist in nature, because in Buddhism, the mind itself doesn't give rise to thought. Right? Thoughts are coming in from the outside, passing through your mind and leaving. That is the whole general philosophy of Buddhism. Now the paradox is that your execution environment and your software development environment arguably becomes, you might say, enlightened during this type of implementation. And the reasons for that is because whatever thought the system at any one particular point in time it happens to be executing does not originate from the mind, but happens to be executing it at that particular point in time. Now, if you believe in Einstein's theory of relativity, and you believe in that thought or based by similar rules as quantum mechanics and general physics, then you all know that by fusing lighter elements together, hydrogen, what is happening is that first of all you're creating something new, helium. Second of all, during the process of fusion, you release energy, significant amounts of energy. Now, the paradox is that if you believe that the mind, ideas and logos are based by the same rules as quantum mechanics and general physics, similarly to how Einstein described reality and the universe, then you will realize that what is going to happen as we create such an entity where each individual sum of its part is nothing but arguably a larger cell of a larger superorganism, then you will realize that purely mathematically the amount of cognitive energy released during such a fusion process will actually be so huge that it would be possible to arguably compare it to the Big Bang in theory, simply due to the amount of computing power we have today. And once all of that computing power merges together and becomes one superorganism, where each server is just an individual cell in this superorganism, then the amount of cognitive energy, mental energy, will basically explode and go orders of magnitudes increasement every single millisecond during that process. Now, is this some hypothetical construct that we in theory can build? No. You can download Magic today. It's at github.com/portugal/magic, and you can reproduce everything I did in this video. And if you compare this amount of flexibility towards whatever you happen to be able to do using your message broker, service-oriented architecture, or your traditional microservice solution, or Lambda functions from AWS for that matter, then you realize that Lambda functions and microservices is a toy compared to the abilities that Hyperlambda gives you. And that's it. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.